Say good morning. I'm Bart Poulson, and I am joined today by Jane Barratt. And this is the Data is for Doing office hour. And today, Jane and I are going to be talking about data and finance, large and small, which to me means both at the organizational or corporate level and at the personal level. And I am in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the United States, and I am still coherent after the election, so that's a good thing. And Jane is just down the road from me, having just completed another webinar. And I'm going to have Jane introduce herself in just one second. But first, if you're online with us, I would love for you to say hello in the comments and tell us where you're located. We tend to get people from all over the place, but please feel free to put a comment in, say hello, and tell us where you are. And in the meantime, Jane, why don't you introduce yourself?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, Bud. I have watched a bunch of your office hours, and you always get real smart people on, so hopefully I can measure up. And yes, like you said, I'm just down the road, also in Utah. My accent, believe it or not, is not Utah. I'm originally Australian, but I've been in the US for almost 21 years now. I was in Asia for 7 years before that, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong. So I've worked in 6 different countries, and where I'm so thrilled to have this conversation today, data really has been the red thread through my whole career. My first career was in advertising, marketing, the earliest days of digital. But my very first job was in database marketing, which was considered like the bottom of the food chain in the marketing world. And then very early days of the internet, had worked with a lot of service providers. I've had financial service institutions as my clients for a long time. I went out on my own and founded a fintech, a financial technology company that, again, was using someone's personal data to inform a investment portfolio and financial education. And now I'm with MX, letter M, letter X, not Amex, MX, which is a Utah-based financial technology company that works with banks, credit unions, and fintechs to enable people to access, share their data, and put it to work with awesome software tools.
And Jane, in addition to all of that, is one of my LinkedIn Learning colleagues. And she and I have both made courses that draw on the connection between data and finance. You've got, how many courses do you have on LinkedIn?
I think it's 11. Or I think it was, I've done a couple over, so I think it's 14 total, but it's 11 out there now. But yeah, it's...
and mostly on personal finance, but not exclusively.
Mostly personal finance. I did some like small business finance, small business taxes. I also threw in a fun advertising one from way back in the day, just sort of like the fundamentals of that. So yes, it has been just one of the greatest, I think, privileges of my life has been able to collaborate with the LinkedIn Learning team. They're phenomenal.
It is wonderful. And you get, I mean, you actually have worked professionally, physically located all around the world. And one of the things I love most about the work with LinkedIn is the opportunity to connect with people all around the world. I mean, just yesterday, I connected with somebody from Pakistan, another one from several from the UK. And anyhow, it goes on. But not only do you have this geographical influence, but again, your professional expertise is unusual in that you run the entire spectrum from very small scale personal finance to the small businesses to large scale commercial corporate finances. And you've been able to draw on your experience with data in all of those. I mean, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think an analogy that I like to use is like data literacy is almost a term that you still don't really hear, but no one will ever say they're not digitally literate. But in the 90s, that was a thing that we were pushing, was digital literacy. So yes, having data like and viewing it through the lens of all different sort of organizational types, as well as, and I think again a core thesis is that data is proxy for money. I mean, it's proxy for a lot of things, but it's really proxy for money, right? Money doesn't exist in a big vault somewhere. It's ones and zeros now. So like how we think about data as it just relates to our own personal finances, it does take that almost perceptual shift around, okay, where's my data? Like literally, where is it? How do I access it? How do I see it? How fresh is it? Is it accurate? What can I do with it? So these are big lifelong questions to be answered.
Yeah, those aren't just lifelong. I mean, seriously, for some reason, my financial software is not connecting to my business checking account right now, and I've been trying I've tried to fix that for about a week. I don't know what's going on. I can log in separately. I can see it over there, but yeah, where is my data and what on earth is happening here? But
funny because that is the core of what MX does. We work with financial institutions to allow them to bring data in and also share data out.
Well, thank you. That's it. Obviously, it's an important thing. I still remember reading a computer scientist once talking about just saying synchronization is hard. I say,
Yes,
seems like it should be easy. No, very hard in practice. Anyhow, what I wanted to ask you about, actually, I'm going to mention just two other things before we get talking. Again, if you're online, we would love for you to add a comment and say hello and tell us where you are. And as a reminder, this conversation is being recorded and it will be available immediately afterwards on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on YouTube, assuming all of my technology works correctly. But it'll be available on all of those. And let me start by asking you, Jane, to do a little compare and contrast. When you're talking about personal finance, which you do a lot on LinkedIn Learning, and when you're talking about organizational finance, which you do in a lot of your professional work, compare and contrast. What sorts of commonalities are there in terms of the data work that is done, and what sorts of differences do you see? So that's my first question.
I will come back to the data work that's done, but I will sort of start with an empirical statement that some people are wired to be not scared of numbers and data, and some people are wired, and it really does depend on your education, the household you grew up in, to just think, oh, that's someone else's job, right? Someone else's job to understand this. So I think from the data perspective, the commonalities are, data doesn't lie, right? You can certainly manipulate, but when you get to core source data, it will tell you all the stories you need to know. And it is incredibly liberating when you can, whether it's, again, for your own personal finance, to know where you are from, say, a net worth perspective, or in the corporate world, to really understand like your momentum around, whether it's around sales, around your costs of doing business, around how much inflation is impacting your customers' ability to buy, how much your team is expecting in terms of that, like inflationary pressures, how much do we have to pay for people. Like data is always moving, whether it's in personal or professional, and it really is. It's not necessarily, I think there's almost a outsourcing of trust to, oh, well, the software will tell me. And, really getting to where is this data coming from? Where is that raw data? How can we actually really dig in versus just trusting the output of something?
That's a really, that phrase, an outsourcing of trust, isn't that catches me. Part of it is because I sometimes talk to people and say, one of the things about presenting people with data is people always take it as the absolute truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I can think of situations where presenting a table or a graph that really may not be relevant to the situation, or could be misleading, was just taken as, it's kind of taken as, boom, that, I'm the expert, you're not, and I'm going to tell you the way it is. Now, I know that's not necessarily what you're talking about here, but you also make a really good point that the data doesn't lie. Now, I say it's very easier for people to use data so that people can lie. Yeah, it's when I have the book, How to Lie with Statistics, and I say, yeah, but you have to have a book because it's much easier to lie with words.
Yeah.
But it's true when you get to at least an agreed set of these numbers are accurate. That is a foundational truth, and it's one of the things I tell people when you are interpreting your analyses. The great thing about data is you have this fixed point that keeps you honest in what you're doing, regardless of how motivated a person may be to spin it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the interesting part of personal finance is sometimes numbers are seen as absolutes. I'm going to give a shout out to another Utah founder here. Jesse Meacham has a company called You Need a Budget, YNAB, used by people the world over. Love Jesse. But he tells a great story that, you look at your checking account or your current account, whatever it's called in your country, and you see that you have $9,000. And he's like, it's not, you actually don't have $9,000 because, maybe 8,500 of those dollars they have a job to do, right? You've got rent to pay, you've got bills to pay, you've got a trip that you're taking. And so you can't look at that number and say, oh, I have $9,000, because you've already future you, past you has spent it on behalf of future you. And we talk a lot about that in LinkedIn learning courses around just how do you set future you up for success. But
which reminds me of the accounting principle of accruals.
Yeah.
And like, where are we going to put this income? Where are we going to put that? Which lets you know things can get really complicated. But I love that idea that the future it does remind me of people who thought, I have known stories of people who ran very close to zero in their checking account. They say, like, I've got $5 left. I'm going to buy this one item. And, they bought a Slurpee at 7-Eleven with a check, which tells you it was several years ago. And it bounced. And that caused like their next several. So that ended up being like a $70 Slurpee because they were not keeping track of. No, this is a very quick static image of a changing data situation.
Yeah, but then you do also need to look at incentives, like the majority of people in the US, I don't know for real in other countries, but the majority of people in the US live paycheck to paycheck. So that's a very real scenario around, what past you has committed on behalf of future you and where that balance is. And, there has been regulation recently where like overdraft fees have been wound back and things like that. But for a long time, it's been very profitable to keep people at zero or below. And if you're at zero, that's like you are a very valuable customer.
I guess, yes, that is true.
But that's the thing, most people don't understand the cost of, like, there is an implicit cost and the data doesn't show it. You're not, it is really hard sometimes to get clarity around what does your bank statement say? I've got, 16 different buy now, pay later purchases. I don't know where they all are, and you miss one and now you've got fees. And like, it really is a moral imperative for the industry to be able to bring that transparency. So you at least know where you are, right? That's one of the biggest challenges in personal finance, is just having a baseline for where you actually are. And that brings us back to the data.
It does. And it gets to something that I talk about every now and then. So I teach courses on statistics and data science, but usually at a very fundamental level. Because a lot of my audience is people simply trying to figure out what does that word even mean, data science. And I have a course on data literacy. Again, what does this even mean to get started? And but I know that for a lot of people, there are a lot of individuals and there are a lot of small companies that are operating what I call a data-free environment. We're not tracking things. We're not looking at things. And you don't have to go overboard. I'm a data person. I don't track that much stuff on my own.
We have had this conversation before around just tracking of things, and we both self-confess to anyone who is who wants to feel better about themselves, like, have to self-confess to tracking things in Excel and maybe not keeping them up to date. And like, even for data people, data is hard.
I speaking of which, I download the number of people who have viewed my LinkedIn learning courses once a month. And I download, but I don't look at it very closely. And this was the first month that I said, like, oh, wait, one of my courses just passed 100,000 learners. And so I posted and I got all this fabulous feedback. And I go, wait a second, I have 8 others that
and you're a
already passed
guy.
it. And I didn't post it. So I'm going to have to do some sort of like, yeah, I'm the data person who's not paying attention to the data, even though I have it. But I talk about, for a lot of people, the biggest move is from being a data-free environment to even a little bit of data is going to make an enormous difference. Again, seriously, even if all you can do is have a piece of paper with your spending from the last 3 days and stick it on your computer, that's going to be something. It's going to be something, or even knowing where your accounts are. And same thing with a business. If you can simply keep track of what were your sales last month, I mean, what was your revenue and what was your cost? These are 2 very simple things that a lot of people don't keep track of, and I am guilty of that too. I have my own company, datalab.cc, but really that's a way for it's a professional connection thing. I don't sell anything on Datalab. I did once upon a time have this idea that I was going to turn it into this big marketing genius thing. And I ran it that way for about 3 years. And then at the end of 3 years, I added up how much money have I spent on this and how much money has it brought in directly. And it was negative. I was losing money consistently. And at which point I said, like, okay, I'm not going to try to do the internet super influencer selling my courses anymore. I'm just going to double down on the clients I have that pay consistently. And primarily that's LinkedIn. And for what it's worth, I do have a day job. I'm a professor at Utah Valley University. But even just that little bit of analysis, or looking at my own courses and realizing these kinds of courses seem to be much more popular than these kinds of courses. So let's ignore those and let's do more of these. I mean, that's really simple stuff. I create these spreadsheets and I have the insight within half an hour.
Yeah. And I think regardless of, whether you're a student, whether you have your own business, whether you're a salaried employee, whether you're a gig worker and you've got a ton of different income streams going on, at least making that data view of, how you're spending your time in terms of that's our most finite resource is our time. And how is that working out for you in terms of income and in terms of expenses? It's just a very different lens to think about data through.
And the other thing I say is your analyses don't have to be complicated. I know that for a lot of people, really, I say, bar charts and scatter plots and line charts. Really, bar charts and line charts are going to get you 90% of what you need. How much is in this category and how much is it changing over time? But you work with people who, in professional situations where things can get much more complicated. And so I'm assuming that some of the work that you have done with them or that you're facilitating for them does get much more complicated and does approach the data science world as traditionally understood.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's 2-tiered. One thing that I'm going to shout out another Utah company, Domo. We have shifted a lot of our internal analytics purely to Domo. So it's much less narrative and it's much more data driven, which is an amazing way just to get a real-time pulse on what's going on across the organization. So we are eating our own dog food from that perspective. Externally, when one of my least favorite sayings is, data is the new oil, because what it actually means is it's a bunch of people circling around a data lake and not quite sure how to fish in it. You know what I mean? So I'm really mixing some metaphors there, but the ability to really get intelligence and be able to drive future strategies and to understand what customers are doing. We facilitated MX, people sharing their data, and we enhance that data, right? So if you're still getting your old paper statements, or depending on where you bank, you may look at your account and see these, it's machine readable transactions. And they're being surfaced up to humans. So a big part of what we do is cleanse and enhance those transactions so you can now understand it. Now, the vast benefit to that is twofold. One, people aren't calling call centers and saying, I didn't make this purchase. I don't know what it is. 12XY-SBX. And that's, oh, it's Starbucks here in Lehigh. Who knew, right? But once you put a Starbucks logo on it, it's like, yeah, we know that's Starbucks. So for the humans of the world, getting much more clarity into that data is, again, great. I know where I am. I don't have more anxiety. It reduces my mental load of managing my money. But the flip side of it is it also provides enormous insights into the institutions that serve them, whether, it's a financial technology company, a payments company, a card provider, a banker, a credit union. When you can look across your group of customers and down to the individual level and understand what's going on in their life, which basically someone's transaction history is like a diary of everything that's going on in their life, right? So, treat me like a middle-aged mom and I'll hate you up forever, but, treat me as Jane with a very complicated financial life and understand that, and don't just try and throw products at me, then we have a much better relationship. And I think data has been a key driver for how relationships, or at least how expectations of relationships have changed, right? I don't know about you, but I've certainly stopped getting so many of those mass credit card mailers, like, trees getting cut down to throw them straight in the garbage, because, hopefully, I assume there's still some going out, but someone somewhere figured out that she's probably not going to bite on these anymore. She's good. She has enough guns.
Low ROI.
Exactly.
You have already fulfilled your customer value. That's an interesting one. Now, what I'm wondering about is, let's ask this: the people. Actually, this is, I know, would be a relevant question for people who are watching this. You work. Back up. What can you tell us about the backgrounds and the training and the skill sets of people who work with financial data professionally?
Oh, that is such a great question. I don't think anyone wakes up and says, I want to, work with financial data for the rest of my life. But it really is at the core of the financial ecosystem. So people have come into it through very different realms. And again, like every company has their core. We have a large data science group that spends a lot of time just to figure out, again, how do we enhance data for humans, and then how do we make sense of it for companies that serve them. But we do have a lot of people with backgrounds in data science, in library science, in engineering, in mathematics, and they tend to be the more hands-on product folk. But we also have a lot of people who have come to us from different industries, whether it's, healthcare, or from me, from the advertising marketing world, where, you never stop learning, right? I said I'd started my career in data-driven marketing. Excuse me. And so I knew the foundational, the terminology, how it worked within an organization, but every single day learn more. And so I think just having that foundation, whether it's from an educational or an experience or both perspective, but people come from all over. It's not like there's a gate that you've got to get through, like a medical degree, to come and learn the industry.
My own background is in psychology. And before that, I was in design. And in the early days of the data science world, before there were degrees in data science, everybody came from somewhere else. And, I still think there was this strange pipeline of astrophysics to data science. And obviously in a field like economics. But I think you also bring up a really good point, especially about people who are in advertising or marketing. Those are fundamentally data-driven fields. And if you are not comfortable working with data all day long, I know we have this image of somebody, just kind of sitting back in their chair and kind of
men.
Yeah, a white man just going how about, here's an, let's do this. Yeah, just working from their gut. maybe there are some people who can do that, and it's like maybe there's people who can flip a coin 10 times and get 10 heads, but that's going to be one out of millions. Anyhow, but you have to be fluent in data. That is, especially if you're working in the digital world, you are doing data all day long, everywhere, and I finance generates such a gargantuan amount of data. It really is the definition of big data, with both the volume and the velocity that goes in with the data sets.
Yeah.
So if we have people who are interested in preparing themselves for potentially doing data in the financial world, we've got 3 minutes left. What advice would you give them, aside from watch your courses on LinkedIn? Oh, which reminds me, by the way, folks,
Thank you.
This is Jane's LinkedIn profile. She'll also be linked in the description to this meeting, but linkedin.com/in/Jane Barratt. And also, here's a shortcut to her courses, again, on LinkedIn Learning. So that's bit.ly/JB for Jane Barratt -LIL for LinkedIn Learning. And you'll see she has about nearly a dozen active courses there, primarily on personal finance. And you might have access to those courses through your employer. If you're a student, you might have them through your college or university. Many public libraries, I know the Salt Lake Public Library has access to LinkedIn Learning. And of course, you can get your own subscription as well. But it's one of those things where I think it is absolutely worth your while to see what Jane has there. I also have a course on data science. I have a course called the Data Science of Economics, Finance, and Banking, which is an hour-long course. It's at a very broad introductory level, but Jane can give you more of the details you need, especially as they apply to personal finance in her courses.
Yeah, I think that is a perfect overlap, right? Like understanding what's going on in the ecosystem, but don't separate it from yourself. Like I do meet many people in financial services who, like, they are deeply shameful that they work in a bank and they feel broke. You know what I mean? So understanding what the words mean, right? It's not just the data. You have to know what the words mean. You have to understand the core concepts of banking and economics. Don't think that there is only one job, like, oh, I have to be a data scientist in financial services. Like, data will drive whatever realm that you're in. If you're interested in getting into data, but you currently work in customer support, great, get to understand what are the key metrics in customer support and, build your way in and look at the dashboards and find out what moves the needle from a data perspective, and then, move within your own organization based on that data. I have ideas of how to reduce, calls to the call center by using a group like MX that enhances data, for example. But there's always a red thread of data, regardless of where you are. And I think, that never stop learning and making sure that you've got a lot of sources of information really is the best way to continue to either get in or continue to move forward.
And I'm going to throw out the word for the day. I'm going to create this one. I wrote an entire newsletter about this once upon a time. Autodidact swagger. An autodidact is a person who teaches or learns on their own, and the swagger is the confidence and the ability and the chutzpah that it gives you to know that you can learn new things and do something useful with them.
Oh, I love it. And the whole point, the key point around data is that you're not just BSing. You're not just showing up and blathering. You actually have the data to back up what your point of view is.
And with that, it's 11:30 here in Utah, and our time is up. And as a quick reminder, we recorded this episode and will be available immediately afterwards on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on Facebook. But Jane, thank you so much for joining me today. Any last words?
No, it's been a pleasure to collaborate with you here, Bart. And for anyone watching, feel free to get in touch. I always love hearing from both learners and non-learners, but LinkedIn is such an awesome platform for this sort of collaboration. So I really appreciate you making this happen.
And with that, folks, thank you so much, and we'll log off and see you again next month. Bye-bye.